Aquarius. There are days when everything looks the same on the outside, the same routines, the same conversations, the same pace moving quietly through your life. And yet, something feels slightly out of place. Not enough to alarm you, just enough to make you pause. It's like standing in a familiar room, but sensing that the light has shifted, even if nothing has physically moved. You might not have words for it. You might not even want to explain it just yet. But somewhere within, there's a gentle awareness that you're no longer standing in the exact same place you once were. And maybe this feeling isn't asking to be solved. Maybe it's simply asking to be noticed. Because what you're sensing right now might be the beginning of something that only reveals itself when you slow down enough to truly feel it. There are days when everything moves along the same familiar path. The morning begins the way it always does. The things you need to do are still there. The conversations continue with a rhythm you've come to know by heart. From the outside, nothing really seems to change. And yet, somewhere deep within, you may have started to sense a very subtle shift. It's not clear, not strong enough to name, just a feeling, soft, almost unnoticeable, like walking into a familiar room and sensing that the light has changed ever so slightly. You're not entirely sure if what you're feeling is real, but, something isn't exactly the same anymore. And maybe what makes you pause isn't the change itself, but the moment you begin to notice it. Aquarius. You've never been someone who rushes to believe in the unseen. You observe, you reflect. You prefer to understand things as clearly as possible, but there are moments when life doesn't come to you through logic. It arrives as a feeling, a quiet knowing, something that doesn't need explanation, yet still reaches you in a way that matters. You may be starting to realize that the things which once held your attention no longer keep you there the way they used to. Questions that once circled in your mind over and over again now seem to soften, not because you've found all the answers, but because something within you no longer feels the need to search in the same way. This isn't a loud shift. It doesn't announce itself. It's more like a faint line slowly moving, gently, quietly, yet enough for you to feel that you're no longer standing in the same place as before. And sometimes, these quiet changes carry more meaning than anything dramatic ever could, because they don't force you to react. They don't demand a decision. They simply exist, still, patient, waiting for you to recognize them when you're truly ready to see. Maybe you don't need to fully understand what's happening within you right now, and maybe there's no need to rush into naming this feeling, because not every shift needs to be explained from the very beginning. Some things only become clear when you allow yourself to stay with them a little longer. And perhaps what's unfolding inside you right now is not a loss, but a quiet, gentle movement, where you begin to step away from an older version of yourself, without needing to turn back just to confirm that you've changed. No noise, no obvious signs. Just a feeling deep enough for you to know that a chapter within you is slowly coming to a close in its own way, and another one, still not fully formed, is quietly waiting for you to step into it when you're ready. Aquarius. There are moments when you're used to taking a step back, not because you're distant, but because you want to see things with more clarity. You don't rush to trust the first feeling. You let things settle. You give yourself time before allowing any conclusion to form. That's how you protect your inner balance. But then, there come certain moments when that familiar way of moving through life no longer feels entirely aligned. Not because it's wrong, just that another layer of awareness is quietly beginning to surface, something that arrives before thought, quick, subtle, so brief, you almost miss it. And if you're not paying attention, it can easily pass by like something insignificant. But this time, maybe you stayed with it just a little longer, not to analyze, just to listen, like standing by a still lake and suddenly noticing a gentle ripple spreading outward. You don't see where it began, but you know something is moving, and maybe what matters isn't the signal itself, but the fact that you've started noticing it. There's no need to understand it right away, no need to explain it right away. Just let it be there. In a world that constantly asks for clarity, Choosing to sit with something unresolved is a very different kind of growth. It doesn't come from knowing more. It comes from no longer needing to know so quickly. You may begin to realize that intuition doesn't always speak in words. It doesn't offer complete answers. It doesn't try to convince you. It simply touches lightly, just enough for you to feel that something is worth paying attention to. And sometimes it shows up in the most ordinary moments, a passing glance, a sudden thought, or a quiet feeling with no clear reason behind it while you're doing something familiar. It doesn't demand attention. It doesn't insist. It just exists. Like a soft reminder that within you, there is a part that understands more than you often give it credit for. Aquarius. You don't have to abandon the way you see the world. You can still observe, still reflect. But this time, you may be learning to create a small pause before drawing a conclusion. A pause wide enough to let you feel what's happening beneath the surface. And within that space, you may begin to notice not everything that comes to you needs to be proven in order to matter. Some things, when felt at the right moment, are already enough to gently guide you in a new direction. Not instantly, not clearly at first, but enough for you to sense that you're slowly learning to trust yourself in a way that feels entirely new. And then, as you begin to listen more closely to what's happening within you, you may also start to notice that something else is quietly shifting in the world around you. The rhythm of things doesn't quite feel the same anymore, not in an obvious way. There's no clear sign you can point to. Just a few things have become quieter. Maybe it's someone who no longer shows up as often as they used to. Conversations that once felt consistent now seem to fade into longer spaces in between. There's no clear explanation, no defined moment you could call an ending, just a kind of absence so subtle it takes you a while to even notice it. And yet, what's interesting is this. Even though they appear less in your outer world, they seem to appear more often in your thoughts, not in a loud way, not in a way that interrupts your life, just small, passing moments. When you're doing something ordinary, and suddenly, a memory or a feeling of them drifts through. Soft, like a breeze. Not strong enough to pull you back, but enough to remind you. Something there hasn't fully closed. And it's not just about people. It could also be unfinished stories, emotions that were once held back. Not because they weren't real, but because the right moment to name them never quite arrived. You may begin to sense that there are things that don't need to be spoken out loud to become clear, in their own quiet way. Not clear through logic, but clear through feeling. And here, something important may be gently unfolding within you. That silence is not always distance. Some pauses are not meant to separate, but to give each person the space to return to themselves, to understand more deeply what they truly feel, to recognize what genuinely matters. And sometimes, distance itself is not a sign of loss. It can be a very natural movement. When two people are no longer standing in the same place as before, and yet, that doesn't take away the value of what once existed. Aquarius, you may have been used to seeking clarity through words, a clear answer, a definite confirmation. But at this point, you may be invited into a different kind of understanding, one that doesn't come from what is said, but from what is felt in the spaces between the words, like listening to music and realizing it's the silence between the notes that gives the melody its depth. If everything were filled, there would be no room for the music to breathe. And perhaps what's unfolding in your life right now carries a similar rhythm. Not everything needs to be filled. Not every question needs an immediate answer. Some spaces are not there to confuse you, but to allow something more genuine to take shape, unrushed, unforced, simply forming in its own natural way. And when you allow yourself to stay with those spaces without trying to fill them right away, you may begin to notice there are connections that don't need constant presence to hold their meaning. There are feelings that don't need to be spoken to be deeply understood. And there are things that don't need to return to what they once were in order to still exist. Aquarius, maybe what you're learning now isn't how to hold on to everything, but how to let things exist as they are, whether that's closeness or a softer kind of distance. Because sometimes the very spaces you once felt unfamiliar with are the places where something more real, more patient, and more meaningful is quietly taking shape. And then, after you've sat with those quiet spaces long enough, you may begin to notice another kind of shift. Very subtle, yet clear enough that you can't quite ignore it anymore. Some things in your life seem to be slowly coming to a close, not in a sudden way, not with a dramatic moment you can point to and call an ending. It's just that things are no longer continuing the way they once did. And what stands out is this: you don't feel the same need to hold on as tightly as before. Not because you've become distant, not because you've forgotten what once mattered, but because somewhere within you, the way you relate to things has quietly changed. Aquarius. You may have once believed that every ending needs a clear reason, an explanation, a visible sign, a moment that makes sense so you can accept it. But now you may be moving through a different kind of transition. Not loud, not dramatic, just a soft release. Like holding something in your hands for a long time and slowly realizing you don't need to grip it the same way anymore. Not because it has no value, but because you no longer need to carry it with you. There are connections, thoughts, even expectations that once felt essential. But over time, as your perspective shifts, as you come to understand yourself a little more, they begin to move to a different place in your life. They don't disappear. They're not erased. They simply are no longer at the center. And at first, this can feel like a quiet emptiness, not loss, more like a space that has just opened, a space that was once filled with what felt familiar. But if you stay with that feeling a little longer, you may begin to realize this space is not here to take something away from you, but to make room for something else to arrive in a more natural way. Like leaving a room you've stayed in for a long time. You don't leave because it was a bad place. You don't leave because you didn't appreciate it. You leave because you know you've experienced what you needed to there, and staying longer wouldn't move you forward anymore. Aquarius. Sometimes growth doesn't come from learning something new. It comes from recognizing what no longer fits who you are. And instead of resisting that shift, you allow it, gently. You don't force yourself to let go all at once. You don't pressure yourself to move on too quickly. You simply stop holding on the way you used to. And in that soft release, you may begin to feel a different kind of freedom. Not loud, not showy, but real enough for you to notice that you're stepping out of a phase of your life without needing to look back too many times. You may not be able to name exactly what is ending, but you can feel that something within you has completed its role, and that doesn't have to be something sad, because every ending isn't here to take something from you. Sometimes it's here to return you to a lighter version of yourself, a version that no longer needs to carry what once felt necessary, but now can finally be set down. And as you continue forward, you may come to see that walking away in quietness can sometimes be the most honest way to bring something to a complete and gentle close. And when a few things have been set down, when what once felt heavy no longer clings to you the same way, you may begin to notice a different state quietly taking shape within you. It's not obvious at first. It's not the kind of moment where everything suddenly feels perfect. It's just a subtle sense of ease, like stepping out of a tight, enclosed space and realizing the air around you has opened up. You don't have to do anything special to create this shift. It arrives as a natural result of no longer trying to hold on to things that no longer fit. Aquarius. There may have been a time when everything inside you felt slightly out of sync, your thoughts moving in one direction, your emotions somewhere else. You tried to make sense of it, tried to organize it, tried to find the right way to bring clarity to what you were feeling. But the more you tried to control it, the more tangled it seemed to become. And maybe what created the shift wasn't that you solved everything. It was the moment you stopped trying to control it all. You began to let things be what they are. Not forcing your emotions to feel stable. Not pushing your thoughts to make sense right away. Just allowing them to exist. And over time, to find their own place. You may start to notice that when you stop chasing what isn't clear, you also stop spending your energy on what doesn't truly matter. And in that space, a new kind of balance begins to form. Not a perfect balance, not a life without any disturbance, but something real, a steady ground, where you can still feel, still think, without being pulled in every direction the way you once were. Like standing in water. Before, you were trying to fight the current, but now, you simply hold your ground, letting the water pass without carrying you away. Aquarius, you may be beginning to understand that not everything in life needs to be resolved right away. Some things just need to be placed where they belong, and they will settle on their own without requiring so much from you. And through that process, you slowly learn how to return to yourself. Not the version that has to constantly improve, not the version that has to understand everything, just a version that is enough for you to feel at ease, enough for you to stop proving anything, enough for you to stay with yourself without feeling a sense of lack. Enough doesn't mean stopping. It doesn't mean giving up growth. It's a quiet pause, a place where you no longer chase expectations that don't truly belong to you, no longer place yourself inside standards you never fully believed in. And maybe what's most valuable about this state isn't the calmness around you, but the feeling that you are no longer in conflict with yourself. A gentle alignment between what you think, what you feel, and how you choose to move forward. Aquarius, if you find yourself in this space, you may not even call it happiness. It's not bright, it's not loud, but it's real. Real in a way that makes you feel you don't need to search so much anymore. And sometimes, this quiet sense of enough becomes the strongest foundation for you to keep moving forward. Slowly, with more clarity, and closer to the person you are gently becoming. And as that sense of balance begins to return, as you're no longer pulled into the same old patterns, you may start to notice something deeper taking place within you. Something is slowly coming to a close. Not in the way you once imagined. There's no clear moment to mark it, no single point you can look back on and say, this is where it ended. It's just that, over time, something that once felt familiar no longer holds the same place in your life. Aquarius. Maybe it's a belief you once held onto for a long time, a way of seeing yourself, a quiet story you told yourself about who you are, about what you deserve. Or maybe it's a feeling that stayed with you longer than you realized. Not overwhelming, not taking over your entire world, but enough to shape how you responded, how you thought, and sometimes how you kept a distance from yourself. Things like that don't disappear all at once. They stay in a quiet way. Until one day, you begin to notice you're no longer reacting the same way you used to. A situation that once lingered in your mind now passes more lightly. A thought that used to repeat itself no longer returns as often. Not because you forced a change, not because you clearly decided you had moved on. It's just that it no longer holds you the way it once did. And that moment, even if it seems small, carries something deeply meaningful. Because sometimes freedom doesn't come from actively letting go, but from realizing you're no longer bound in the same way. There's no need for a goodbye, no need for a final confirmation. Just a new kind of space forming between you and what once held you back. Aquarius. You might not immediately notice that you've changed, because this kind of shift doesn't come from the outside. It doesn't show up through big actions. It doesn't create an obvious difference for others to see. It happens on a deeper level, a place within you where you begin to feel lighter without needing a clear reason. Like taking off something you've worn for too long, and only after it's gone do you realize how heavy it used to feel. You may not feel the need to go back and examine what changed. You don't need to analyze how you got through it, because sometimes the fact that it no longer affects you the same way is already the answer. And maybe what matters most in this phase isn't that something has ended, but that you allowed it to end without force, without needing to prove anything, without needing to explain. You simply keep moving forward, leaving behind what has already completed its role in your life. Aquarius. There are endings that don't carry a sense of loss, but instead bring a quiet kind of freedom. Not loud, not dramatic, but enough for you to feel you're no longer being pulled in the same direction as before. And within that lightness, you may begin to sense a new space opening up. Not something that needs to be filled right away, but something you can slowly step into as a different version of yourself. And when you've set certain things down, when a part of you begins to feel lighter, you may start to notice something else quietly opening, not something obvious, not something entirely new arriving from the outside, but rather, the way you see things is beginning to shift. Aquarius. You may have once believed that every beginning needs a clear sign, a new person, a new opportunity, a completely different situation. But at this point, what feels new to you may not arrive that way. It comes through your perspective, the same situation, the same person, and yet your experience of it is no longer the same. You don't react as quickly. You don't rush to assign meaning to everything anymore. Instead, you observe a little more. You allow things to exist without needing to define them right away. And within that subtle shift, you may begin to notice some connections no longer feel as heavy as they once did. Not because they've completely changed, but because you're no longer carrying the same expectations into them. Aquarius. When you stop trying to make everything unfold in a certain way, you also stop placing yourself inside the same emotional patterns you've known for so long. Someone may still be there. Their actions may not have changed much. They may not show up any differently than before, but you feel them differently. Fewer questions, fewer assumptions, just a simple presence, lighter, less pressured, more real. And sometimes, it's this inner shift within you that transforms the entire experience. You don't need to start over. You don't need to search for something entirely new. You simply look again, from a different state of being. And somehow, everything begins to feel different, like looking at a familiar landscape at a different time of day. The scene hasn't changed, but the light has. And it's that light that reveals details you never noticed before. Aquarius. What's opening in front of you now may not look like a big opportunity in the usual sense. It doesn't need to impress you. It doesn't need to announce its value. It just exists. Quietly, subtly, waiting for you to meet it from a different place within yourself. And when you're no longer carrying the pressure to understand everything, to define everything immediately, you may begin to feel a very different kind of connection, unrushed, unforced, yet deep enough that you don't feel the need to question it so much. And within that space, you may come to see a connection doesn't have to become clear right away to have meaning. Sometimes it's the gentleness of it that makes you want to stay a little longer, not to find answers, but to experience what's there more fully. Aquarius. There may have been a time when everything needed a reason. Every feeling had to be explained. Every connection had to be clearly defined. But now you may be stepping into a different kind of space, one where you no longer feel the need to name everything so quickly. And in that, something quietly beautiful begins to form. A space, not meant to be filled, but to allow something softer, something more aligned, to appear in its own time. You don't have to search far. You don't have to change everything. Just stay with yourself in this state, and slowly you may begin to realize what you once thought had to come from the outside has, in its own quiet way, been unfolding within you all along. And after you've moved through all of that, the small shifts, the quiet spaces, the gentle endings that came in their own way, you may begin to realize you're standing in a very different place now. Not entirely new, but no longer the same as before. A space in between, where you don't feel the need to rush forward, but you're no longer feeling stuck either. Aquarius. Maybe what matters most right now isn't about fully understanding what's happening. Not every journey comes with a clear map from the beginning. There are seasons that are simply meant to be felt, to stay with yourself without needing to hurry toward a complete answer. You may be used to wanting to know where everything is going, wanting to see the meaning before you fully step in. But this time, life may be inviting you into a different experience, not a lack of direction, but a quiet trust in each small step, even when you can't yet see the entire path. Some changes don't arrive to be noticed. They don't create big disruptions. They don't demand your full attention. They unfold very quietly, like the way light shifts throughout the day. You don't notice each moment, but by evening, everything feels different. And maybe what you're sensing right now moves in that same rhythm, not an event that needs to happen, not a turning point you need to mark, but a real, quiet movement, where the way you see, the way you feel, and the way you move forward is slowly changing without needing to make any noise. Aquarius, you don't have to speed up to catch anything. You don't have to force yourself to understand everything right now, because some things only become clear when you give them enough space to reveal themselves, like standing in front of a large painting. If you get too close, you only see scattered details. But when you step back, everything begins to connect more naturally, And maybe what you need right now isn't to move faster, but to allow yourself to step back just a little, to see things from a wider view, without judgment, without rushing to conclusions, just observing and feeling. Aquarius, if there's one thing to carry with you from this journey, maybe it's this: you are changing. In a way that is real, even if you don't always see it right away. And that is enough. There's nothing to prove, nothing to explain to anyone else. As long as you know you're moving in a rhythm that feels true to you, then each small step holds its own meaning. And as you continue through days like these, days that seem ordinary, yet carry something deeper beneath the surface, you may come to realize something very simple. Things don't have to be dramatic to change your life. Sometimes it's the quiet shifts, the slow movements, the honest, subtle changes that bring you closer to the person you are becoming. And maybe all of this began the moment you allowed yourself to pause and truly listen to your own voice within.